Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode number 12.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
Hey there, it's Adam Franklin from the Web Marketing That Works podcast, joined, as always, by my co-host and friend, Toby Jenkins. How are you, Tobe?
Good, thanks, Ads. Hi, everyone. How you going?
This is the show for people like you and like us who love marketing on the web. You will be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments where we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works.
This show is brought to you by our new book, Web Marketing That Works, and thank you so much for your support of it so far. And specifically, there's the 33 free templates that go with it. So if you'd like to download those, you can jump over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book.
I would like to give a very big shout out and thank you to the listeners that left us a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you to Karen at BMU, Daniela Herrera, and Dan Norris. We really appreciate the support, and it makes a tremendous impact on our visibility on iTunes, and we're pleased to say that we are still, at the time of recording, on the top of the new and noteworthy. So thank you very much. Now, the guest for today's show is Ian Altman, who is the author of the new book called Same-Side Selling. And yes, he's a sales expert, but Tobes, you will have noticed as well in the last sort of decade or so that we've been in business that sales and marketing have really begun to merge into the one thing. And I recall in your interview recently with Eric Kalis, the author of Reality Marketing Revolution, you guys spoke about the sales team and the marketing team really merging and mashing together to form the revenue department. And Ian is of a very similar opinion. And we look at the fact that, if you do your marketing well, the sales process is a lot smoother. But we even go one step further and look at this idea of collaborative selling. And, marketing's job is to provide the information so that people can make an informed decision. And the role of sales then is to help guide that prospective customer to the solution or the product or the service that is actually best for them. And in one example, Ian actually sat literally on the same side of the table as the prospective customer as he guided that person to a purchase decision. So anyway, how about we hear it from the horse's mouth, Tobe?
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. Welcome, listeners. It's Adam Franklin here, and I'm pleased to be joined by Ian Altman. Thanks for joining us, Ian.
Hey, it's great to be here, Adam.
Now, Ian is the best-selling author of Upside Down Selling and the newly released book Same-Side Selling, which is coming out in April. Of his latest book, Daniel Pink has said Altman and Quarles have delivered a whole new world of selling, and they're really onto something. Ian started, grew, and sold companies from startup to values in excess of $1 billion. Ian is a highly sought-after speaker on sales and business development worldwide. He writes a weekly blog, and his content is shared on the Huffington Post, Business to Community, and various publications around the world. Ian's clients come to him when their message is falling on deaf ears, when they face increased pricing pressure, or when they struggle to stand out from the competition. He helps his clients become outrageously successful, targeting and winning business. Ian, that's a brief overview of you and your book with Jack Quarles. What have I missed? Can you just fill in a couple of gaps for our listeners?
Absolutely, and I'll give you just a little background. So I started my first company back in 1993, and like a lot of entrepreneurs, I started it with just me, and we became a Fast 50 company, meaning one of the fastest 50 or one of the 50 fastest growing companies in the Washington, D.C. area. Just 5 years later, in 1998, we then added a software company. We dealt mostly with really large enterprise customers, the Fortune 500 as they're referred to in the States. And So we grew both companies in parallel, and then by 2005, a group of investment bankers out of New York said, hey, we like the company, would like this guy to serve as managing director. They acquired the company, asked me to oversee the overall growth of the company, and then we expanded into 14 countries around the world and grew the value from 100 million to just shy of 2 billion in a few years. So that's kind of been my background. And in 2009, I started this company, grow my revenue, just centered around helping other companies grow, because that's always been a lot of fun for me, is helping companies reach just huge success. And that growth trajectory is what's fun for me. Once it gets large, I get kind of bored.
Fair enough. Now, in terms of actually growing companies, marketing and sales are just so important. And what I like to ask as one of the early questions on this interview is, what is your marketing philosophy? Or we could even tie that into, what is your sales or marketing philosophy?
Yeah, well, you know what? For starters, Adam, I see sales and marketing as much more closely tied than a lot of people do. And I often think it's the flip side of the same coin. And let's face it, the customer, if they hear one message from marketing and a different message from sales, they're not sure which one's lying. They're going to assume it's sales, but one of them is, and the customer's not going to be comfortable. So for me, one of the biggest philosophies I have is that it's critical that we describe the problems we solve more so than we describe what we do. Because let's face it, if every time you drove your car down the road, when you made a right turn, it made a clicking sound, what you would search for is right turn and clicking sound on my car. You wouldn't search for certified mechanic. You wouldn't search for the solution. You search based on the problem. So my marketing philosophy is to always speak to the problems you solve for people rather than what you do.
And Ian, what have been your major aha moments in your business, marketing, and sales journey so far?
You know what? I guess there's a couple of them, and some of these concepts we cover in the book. One of them is that oftentimes I see companies who are trying so hard to expand their business into other areas that they sometimes will reach into domains where they're not experts. And so what happens is, and I had this recently with somebody who they were doing services for my company, and they did a great job. Probably if I ranked them 0 to 10, I'd give them a 9 or 10 across the board. Then what they did is they said, oh, we can also help you with this other thing we heard you talking about. And in that area, the level of work they did was at about a 5. Well, what happened was when someone asked, hey, what do you think of this vendor? When I thought about it, I said, well, they're about a 6. Now, most of the work they did was a 9 or 10, but what happened is I averaged down because this other element was a lower level, and it made me doubt whether they could do the stuff that they had already been doing well. So that level of people trying to get, they go too far. We call it, the chapter is called Restraint in Same-Side Selling. It's this notion of people just going outside of their comfort zone.
And in those situations, is the moral of the story to stay super focused on only what you do best and sort of ignore the other stuff?
That's absolutely brilliant, Adam. Yeah, that's exactly it. So what you have to do is realize what you do best and where you add the most value. And that's where you can charge your premium, and that's where you're going to earn your value. And then when your client's asking you about things that are not your area of expertise or where you're not as strong, just be candid and say, you know what, that's not a great area of strength for us. That's not our best thing. However, I know 2 different firms that do that really well. If you'd like, I can make an introduction. And that way you're referring to someone who's an expert. And now you actually get credit for those other people doing a good job.
That's a really great point. Now, in part 2 of the podcast is where we look at marketing experiments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'd like you just to reflect over, I guess, your marketing and sales career and share with us what has worked really well, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for a client, and what can we sort of learn from that?
Yeah, well, let me give you one example. There's actually 2 examples that I'll talk about that are jumping to mind right now. The first is, so this premise of same-side selling, for starters, is this idea of getting the buyer and the seller metaphorically on the same side of the table. And I had one of my clients had one of their partners attend a workshop or a sales kickoff I was doing in Texas, in the U.S. And so I talked to this guy briefly at the sales kickoff, and he told me about this deal they were doing in in Asia where the client was really just beating him up on price. And it was about a $4.5 million US deal. And so it's interesting that I see the same guy 45 days later at another event, and he comes up to me, he says, "Oh, I have to tell you what happened." I said, "Okay." And at first, to be candid, I didn't remember who the guy was. So I felt a little embarrassed, but then he reminded me who he was. And he says, "So I was in this meeting in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm across the table from this guy who's just been berating me on price, and I did some of the things you talked about. And the guy literally stood up, walked around to my side of the table, sat down next to me and said, 'Well, let's figure this thing out together.'" He said, "And we spent the next 30 minutes going through this, and the guy looks at me and says, 'I feel bad. I've been giving you a hard time about price because we're going to make about $15 million off of what you guys are doing for us.'" Now, we always talk about same-side selling as metaphorically being on the same side of the table. This is the first time I've ever heard somebody where literally they physically moved to the same side of the table with them. So that was interesting. And the model that we use for this is something that's had huge success. We write about it in the book. It's called Entice, Disarm, and Discover.
And can you take us through each of those components for us, Ian?
Absolutely. So the biggest impact that we can have on how somebody perceives us is right at the first meeting, the first interaction we have with them. And so Entice, Disarm, Discover is at the very beginning. And the formula is this, is that first we want to explain to somebody, we want to entice them by explaining a challenge that we're good at solving and an obstacle, an issue we're good at solving with extraordinary results. Then we want to disarm by explaining to them that we're not necessarily a great fit and we can't achieve those results for everybody. And then we want to trigger a discovery phase where we learn more about their situation to determine if there's a good fit between their needs and what we do. So I'll give you a couple examples. Would that help if I give you an example of what it sounds like?
That'd be great, Ian. Thanks.
Okay, so it would sound like this. So instead of just saying, "Oh, we're an insurance broker and we can help you with all these great things," and no one believes it anyhow, I've got a client in this space, and what they determined is the biggest complaint their clients have is that if they're spending $1 million a year today on insurance, health insurance, they know that's going to grow to $2 million over the next 7 years, and they feel like there's nothing they can do about it. So what my client, the Entice, Disarm, Discover we built for them sounds like the following. They say, "We work with organizations who are currently spending $1 million a year. They know that that's going to grow to $2 million over the next 7 years if they don't do anything about it. That's an extra $3.5 million out of their pocket that the CEOs we talk to would rather have for other purposes. We find we can have a dramatic impact on about half the people we speak with who are facing that challenge. But if solving that is important to you, I'm happy to learn more about your business and see whether or not we can help." Their prior approach had about a 1% response rate, and this one has just shy of a 30% response rate.
That's huge.
And there's a couple key points in there. One is this notion that in essence, we're displaying some humility that illustrates that, look, we're not the right fit for everybody. And candidly, not enough marketing and salespeople have that humility to say, look, we're not the best thing for everybody. And an interesting dynamic happens when I acknowledge that not everybody is the right fit for me. If you're the customer and I just explain that I can have a dramatic impact on half of the people, which half do you hope you're in? The group I can help or the group I can't?
Totally.
And now they're selling you on why they're a good fit for you, and it just changes that whole dynamic. So the pressure is off. Now we're just trying to find a fit together.
And it's almost like an application process, isn't it? They're trying to articulate why they hope that they will be in the half that you can help. And that humility that you show, to me, automatically just massively increases the trust that prospective customer has with you.
Yeah. Now there's a couple funny elements to this.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the funny things is that there's two things that people ask me. One is, well, so what if you determine that you're not a fit? And the answer is, then you tell them that they're not a fit, and you're happy to walk away, because if they don't have an important need for you to solve, why do you want to waste your time with them? The other funny part is I find this in my business. So I'll run into certain industries that I don't have as much of a differentiator as I do in others. And I'll tell people, look, I'm probably not the best person to help you. What's shocking is that people will then spend the next 20 minutes trying to convince me why they're a good fit for me after I just told them that I probably can't help them.
That's good.
And we're not doing a Jedi mind trick. We're not trying to deceive anybody. I believe effective sales and effective marketing is about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. So it's not about casting a wide net and getting everybody who could theoretically be interested. I want to find the people who are experiencing problems that my clients are the best people at solving.
It's so refreshing to hear that the truth and being, candid and honest with your customers straight off the first meeting is such a powerful tactic with this entice, disarm, and discover process that you've got. Now, just an additional question on that is, I guess, in terms of before that first meeting, do you find in whether you call it sales or marketing or just purely education, do you typically find there's been a process of education through content or any online resources before that first face-to-face meeting?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of content marketing because especially if you're focused on problems that you're good at solving and describing different scenarios and third-party references or stories to challenges other people have faced and the outcomes you've provided for them. That lays a foundation so that the format that I often encourage people to use is, look, first you want to talk about the issue somebody was facing. Then we want to talk about how that issue was impacting their organization. And we also want to describe why that issue was important enough for them to solve. Then you can I'll give people an entire sentence if they want that says they helped these people and no more than that. Then you talk about what the outcomes or results were for that customer. So if you think about it, if I'm someone who stumbles across that piece of content, I might associate with that issue. I may not have thought about all the different areas of impact that were impacting that other organization, so it may make me aware of why this is a big deal. And when I see why it was important to them, I might realize that it's also important to me. And then what I see is the results they achieved, which makes me feel good. But what I didn't include is how they did it, which means I have to talk to the company to find out how they did this.
Sure. Now, Ian, how about we have a look at the bad? What's failed over the years for either yourself or for clients, and what can we learn from that?
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about some of my failures. The show doesn't run long enough to cover all those things. I could talk about how it's funny, the chairman of the company that I sold my company to, the chairman of the parent company, years after I left the company, the guy ended up getting indicted on several counts of fraud. And so I would have loved to have done a little bit more due diligence there, but that's a whole other issue. The biggest, there's two big areas of failure that I see. One is that when people discover that there's not a fit, they revert back to their old style tactics, and they try to convince the client that they should be buying their stuff, even though they've just concluded that there isn't a good fit. So that's something that I see over and over again. Also, this notion of focusing on discovering what's important to the client and making sure you're addressing those needs requires work, and it's a whole lot easier to just deliver a PowerPoint presentation and talk about your stuff than it is to ask the right questions to discover what's important to the client. So sometimes what will happen is people get lazy and they start by saying, well, gee, here's where we can help other clients. Is that important to you? And the client says, no, not really. And they go, oh, then let me show you my PowerPoint. So they just kind of revert back to, the old show up and throw up mentality of sales and marketing, which we all know how that story ends. Usually somebody dies.
Yeah, absolutely. The old, I'll get back to you on that one. Now, how about the ugly? This is confession time. Have you had or have you witnessed any dead set shockers?
You know what? There's been a couple. I remember, this is a philosophy that I've held for years. And back in my old business, I remember we were going to meet with a client, and we didn't have. There's certain things I talk about in the book called issue impact importance I just touched on. And I used to always tell my people, look, if we can't identify this, we don't go to a meeting. We don't allocate resources. And of course, I was the CEO, so I was allowed to violate my own rules. And I went to go meet with this client. And of course, I tell people, look, if you don't get this on the table, what happens is in the end, clients make a non-decision and they just do absolutely nothing. And then you've wasted all this time. And of course, I was convinced that, man, if I go meet with them, they're going to figure this thing out. And of course, after 6 months of a whole bunch of time and resources invested, they decided to do absolutely nothing. And it ended up being an ugly failure and a great example to demonstrate to my team why we had to adhere to those policies. So that's one area that I look at and say, man, we really messed up that one. The other side is that I'll get people who are under the false. People often get under the false impression that if I discount, that's going to encourage the client to make a decision sooner. And if you think about it, if I had something that I was selling to you and I said, Adam, look, I got this new surfboard. It's awesome. And man, we sell it for $1,000 though. And you say, it's more than I'm looking to spend. And now 3 weeks later, I say, hey, Adam, that surfboard, I can get it to you for $600. The first thing that goes through your mind is not, hey, great deal. The first thing that goes through your mind is, ooh, what's wrong with it? So when we discount, we often think and hope the client's going to be more inclined to purchase, but it usually actually erodes their trust or confidence rather than bolsters it.
And might make you think, why was it so expensive the first time you told me about it?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole thing that we talk about in terms of negotiation that basically my philosophy there is that you never give a unilateral concession, because if you give up price without taking something else off, then you're just training your customer to believe that you were willing to overcharge them before.
Right.
And now that they called you on it, well, you give them the lower price, and now they'll never trust you again. And you also train them that, look, you may as well ask for a discount because you don't give anything up when you get one.
Right. So the key there is if price is an issue or budget is an issue, then remove value if you're going to bring the price down.
Sure. So it's hey, gee, Adam, you guys are going to do this work for us from a media standpoint. That's fantastic. But you said it's going to be $100,000. We only have $80,000. And your response is, hey, that's fantastic. Which of the things on the statement of work can we eliminate so we can get it down to that price point? Happy to help.
Yeah, great. Now, what about, sometimes people introduce discounts or a sense of urgency, and that, it's $1,000, but if you sign off by the end of the week, the surfboard is $600. How does urgency tie in with your sales philosophy?
Well, in a business to consumer setting, that level of price anchoring works pretty well, because someone says, "Hey, look at that! It was, it's going to be $1,000, but I can buy it today for $700." So that works, especially in business to consumer when you're selling a commodity. In the B2B space, the whole idea of that price anchoring or that sense of urgency, I tie more to the results. So what I tell people, and we cover this in the book also, is don't sell resources, sell results. So for example, if you were selling a service to somebody and you said, so let's say 6 months from now, how would we measure the success of this initiative we did together? And the client says, well, I mean, we'd be getting more traffic, getting more visibility, and more business. How much more? And the client says, well, gee, Adam, if this goes well, I could see us generating next to $2 million a year in business. Okay. How soon would you guys like that to start? And now the sense of urgency becomes their sense of urgency to realize those results, rather than some false sense of urgency that says, oh, I was going to discount it, but only until Friday. Because, of course, let's say Friday came and went. Your expectation would be that next Tuesday you could still buy it for that originally discounted price if you at least whine about it a little bit.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you definitely would. Now, can you just quickly take us through, you've spoken about the same side selling and that great story of the client actually, or the prospective client, literally sitting on the same side of the table to work it out. What's the notion of upside down selling?
So the notion of upside down selling, the principles are centered around the same concepts, but in upside down selling, the idea is how do we engage our non-salespeople to help grow the business? So if you think about it in any organization, the statistics show that about 1 in 9 people have a job that specifically says they're in sales. But especially for services businesses, most of their people who are customer facing want and have nothing to do with sales. And the idea of upside down selling is, how do we get those people engaged in a way that they feel good about, that has some integrity? What are the types of questions they can be asking to identify opportunities? How do they qualify what's worth pursuing, which one isn't? And then how do they effectively hand that off to somebody else and also get referrals into new opportunities to expand business without coming across as a pushy salesperson? So that's kind of the encapsulated view of upside down selling. It's something that people can read in about 30 minutes, which I guess is why it appealed so well to CEOs and salespeople. And since I put myself in both categories, I can relate to those people. It's about my attention span.
Sure.
So that's the idea behind that, and it covers some of the principles in same-side selling, but same-side selling covers them in much greater depth. But it's the kind of book that a lot of companies will get for all of their people who are customer-facing, because they can read it in 30 minutes and have a new philosophy. The end of every chapter, similar to same-side selling, has action items that say, here's how to put these things to work. Here's specific steps on how to apply what you just learned.
And would it be fair of me to say that it boils down to solving people's problems as opposed to selling stuff, if you're one of those 8 out of 9 people who doesn't have sales in their title?
Absolutely. I mean, most people who aren't in sales have the notion that salespeople are just there to lie and get the client to spend money on something they don't need. And so they're reluctant to get involved in selling. If I can get them to engage and realize that, the way we often say it is, look, so right now, person X, you're dealing with this customer. Do you feel that as a business, we're helping them solve issues better than they can do themselves? And they always say, oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. How would the client feel if we could help them solve more of the issues that were important to them? Would they be upset or would they like it? Oh, they'd love it. Okay. Well, let's talk about how we can do that. And really, that's what selling is trying to figure out what's important to them. And sometimes the client doesn't know, and we have to teach people how to ask questions to uncover what might be important to them, even though they haven't figured it out yet.
Great. Now, Ian, what would your advice be to somebody starting their business from scratch from a sales and marketing point of view? What would you be doing first?
The first thing I'd be doing is making sure that I know unequivocally what problem I'm solving for that market and why they need what it is that I'm selling. There's some research that I've done with CEOs and executives on how they make decisions. And I take people through a series of exercises. It takes about 20 minutes to do this with a group of CEOs or executives. And we talk about how they would go about a certain decision if it was presented to them. And the questions that they need to have answered are, first, first is, what problem does it solve, or why do I need it? The second one is, what's the likely outcome or results? And the third one is, why would we buy this from these people? And so if we're not selling aligned with that, we extend sales cycles and we face more pricing pressure. So the first thing I would tell somebody is, look, you have to understand why people need what it is that you sell and the problem that you're solving. And then you have to understand what's the likely outcome or results that those people would need to have. And if you can articulate those very well, then the why you becomes implied, because the vendor who can best help the customer realize why they need what it is they're looking at and makes the customer feel the best about the likelihood of the outcome or results, that's the vendor you go with.
That makes total sense. And total sense from the content marketing point of view that, probably precedes that sales conversation, that if you really understand who your buyers are and what problems you solve for them, and you're putting stuff onto your website or blog, as you said earlier, like about the right clicking noise on the indicator, as opposed to searching for a certified mechanic. If you're publishing information about what people's problem is, and then you can clearly articulate that and it matches up in those sales consults, then it's a powerful combination when all that stuff's aligned.
Absolutely, and the point you just made, Adam, is brilliant, which is that notion of if I'm first talking about the problems that someone else has a need to solve, then if that's my content marketing angle, the people who I'm going to attract are the people facing that problem. And now when they contact you and they say, wow, I was reading this article, you say, really? Why did that article strike a chord with you? Oh, because we're facing that issue. Great. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And now we're talking about their issue, not our stuff. And by doing that, we're going to better attract their interest and make them feel more comfortable that we understand their situation.
Great. Now, Ian, my next question is what's next on the marketing front for you? And I guess I'd specifically like to hear, what's on the book marketing front for same-side selling that's out very soon.
Well, the biggest thing that my co-author Jack and I have for same-side selling is we're really setting out to change not only the way people sell, but the way they buy. And you shared the quote from Daniel Pink, which was great on the book, and there's some other ones that we're really proud of. But the one that we're most proud of actually is from the people at Corporate United, and they're one of the largest group purchasing organizations in the world. They represent 200 of the world's largest 500 companies. And what they said is they're exponentially more likely to buy from people who are following these same-side selling methods than people who aren't. And what it does is they've actually got Jack speaking at one of their conferences targeting their suppliers that says, look, here's the way you need to work with us. And if you work with us this way, it's going to work better for both of us. And so there are a lot of books that are written from the sales angle. And in essence, how do I manipulate buyers? We're not familiar with another book that talks about the buying and the selling side in parallel. And, I learned a lot writing this with Jack because, there's a lot of things that I assumed was going through the buyer's head that Jack confirmed just isn't so.
And how did you and Jack come about meeting and collaborating on this book?
Well, it's an interesting story. So Jack attended a workshop I was doing in the Washington, D.C. area, and I thought, wow, how cool. Jack's trying to learn how to use some of these techniques in his business. Well, later Jack told me, look, I was coming just to see what the competition was teaching from the selling side. I was trying to get some competitive intelligence. He said, and look, I realized pretty quickly that the stuff you were talking about was the same thing I was trying to explain to my customers on the purchasing side, which is, look, you got to focus on value over price. And by doing this collaboratively, what we determined was, look, here's a series of things that create an adversarial tension between buyer and seller. And then we uncover in the book, here's why these things happen. And here's, in many cases, here's the script or formula for how you reverse that trend so you end up on the same side of the table. And so it was interesting how we came together that way. And it's kind of a neat thing to have somebody who's traditionally been on the purchasing side so aligned with these messages.
Yeah, it sounds like a really nice partnership there.
Yeah, it's worked out quite well.
Now, Ian, part 3 of the podcast is where we dive deep into one specific area. And my question for you is, which specific tactic brings you the most joy?
Well, so there's one principle that I often cover with clients, and it's something that we talked before about this idea of entice, disarm, and discover. But there's a component that we have in the book called fit, or finding impact together. And what it entails is basically working with your client on discovering whether or not this issue they have has enough impact on their business and is important enough to warrant your time. And there's some key questions that I cover with people on how to get there. And one of them entails talking about their competition. And so, of course, we can never say something negative about the competition, but they can. And just through a series of simple questions, we can uncover that. So it sounds something like this. I might say, gee, I know you're already dealing with this other company. We always like to see how we match up against other people. Can you tell me some of the things you like about this other vendor? And usually people will engage in that type of discussion. I mean, if you asked a question like that, Adam, you'd assume that answer, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I would if I was asked that.
Yeah, so then they cover that, and then you get all that information out, and then you say, look, I mean, with the exception of Adam Franklin, nobody's perfect. Let's say you could change one or two things about that vendor. What would those be? And the client will often say, well, we wish they did this better, that better. Really, can you give me a specific example of that? And what you're doing is you're getting them to think through their areas of disappointment with that vendor. Now, during all this, you have to do some soul searching to determine whether or not you're actually well positioned to address those issues they just raised. And if you are, the way you start that dialogue is the potential of us addressing those issues worth us having a short conversation to see whether or not we can help? And so that little method of just uncovering what they like and what they wish they would change about the competition can really shed some valuable light onto where you're at competitively. And when you ask those questions, what you're going to get is a list of what's important to that customer, not what you think might be important.
That's really powerful. And Ian, can you share with us a really effective pro tip for our super advanced listeners?
Well, you know what? Hopefully nobody's driving during this, because we don't we don't want to create any accidents. The biggest pro tip I would say is that we always want to focus on the results. And oftentimes when you're dealing with pricing pressure, the reason why customers are giving you pricing pressure is one of two reasons. One, someone said, hey, see if you can get a better price. And they ask you, and if you're not equipped to deal with that, then you're in an uncomfortable position. The more likely reason why people face pricing pressure is because the client hasn't connected the dots between the value or results they're getting compared to the price that you've proposed to them. And so my pro tip is never discuss price until we've gotten to the point that the client understands unequivocally the impact of their business of doing nothing and the value of the results. So if I said, gee, by not solving this problem, how would you imagine? Could you even quantify how that's impacting your business? And when they say, oh yeah, it's costing us, X millions of dollars. Okay, so let's fast forward 18 months. If this is really successful, what do you think the results would be? Oh, well, not only would we recover that money, but would probably make an extra, X millions of dollars. That's a great time to talk about your price, because then they've just concluded how much they're losing and how much more they're going to gain. That's a great time to talk price. So that's the big tip I would give. And if you master that, you face very little pricing pressure.
And that, excuse me, and that way the prospective client, they've created that figure themselves, haven't they? And then it seems then your actual price that you offer for your services to help achieve that value is relatively small, and it's a lot more likely to go ahead in as a deal.
Absolutely. And the big caution I will give you is that if the client, let's say you have a $100,000 solution that you're selling, and the client says, well, right now we're losing about $5,000, and I think if this is really successful, we're going to make $15,000. You've pretty much just concluded that you're not going to make that sale.
yeah, and you wouldn't want to make that sale, would you? Because you're setting yourself up and the client for an unhappy experience.
Exactly. If you want to have great referrals, deliver great results, and referrals are almost automatic, because then your referral question sounds something like this: gee, Adam, when we spoke last time, I recall you were facing this issue, right? And they say, oh yeah, okay. So 0 to 10, how well do you feel we addressed that for you? Oh, like a 10, it's great. All right. Can you think of one or two other organizations who might be in that same situation who would appreciate the same outcome that you had? Oh yeah. And now your introduction isn't, hey, I got this guy Adam who wants to call you and try and sell you stuff. It's the introduction becomes, look, we went to Adam when we were facing this issue and we had this great outcome. I thought you might appreciate meeting him. That's a pretty powerful introduction.
Yeah, and then there's not that sort of hesitation that, oh yeah, I'm going to be sold to or pressured into a meeting or something that I'm going to be uncomfortable saying no to.
Exactly. Well, and here's the kicker: when you have that meeting and they get this introduction and they're all excited, we start back at Entice, Disarm, Discover, and we say, hey, I'm so glad that Joe introduced us. And I know he talked about the results that we had for him, and I just want to tell you right at the onset, I don't yet know enough about your situation to know if I can deliver the same results for you. But if I can learn a little bit more about your situation, I can determine whether or not we can help. And that way you immediately disarm the notion that you can help everybody, and now you're in discovery mode side by side with them.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Now, Ian, you've written a couple of books, and first one was a bestseller, and no doubt the second one will be too. But who have you actually learnt from, either in person or via their books and their blogs, and who can you recommend?
Oh, I tell you, I've got a long list of those. Obviously Daniel Pink gave us a nice quote for the book, and we see very much eye to eye on a lot of these concepts. I've learned a lot from him. Seth Godin, I'm sure, is on the list of 84% of human beings as somebody who's a great person to learn from. Not a week goes by where I'll end up sending Seth a note that says, man, this post was brilliant. And there's just certain perspectives that he shares that really shed light on issues that sometimes we can easily overlook. The book that I'm reading right now that I really enjoy is Gary Vaynerchuk's new book, which is Jab, 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 Right Hook. I don't know if you've read it yet.
I'm reading it.
It's got just some great tangible examples of what works and what doesn't that really gives some tremendous insight. And then there's a book that's coming out in about a month by a guy named Derek Coburn called Networking is Not Working. And he's a guy that I've personally learned a lot from in terms of how to create a really valuable network. And just, it's got some really great ideas in there. And he's a guy who's just built an amazing network in the Washington, D.C. area of, if you can imagine this, 100 high-powered, very successful executives where nobody is trying to sell anything to anyone else in the room. It is a membership-based organization that is not inexpensive. It's month to month. You don't have to make any long-term commitment, and they have about a 90% retention level in the group.
That's phenomenal.
It's really remarkable. So those are the people. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a lot of people who have really helped share a lot of value for me over the years, and those are just a few off the top of my head in terms of books and blogs and the like. There's some great stuff out there. That's great.
I'll definitely keep an eye out for that book when it comes out. And it's interesting to hear that Seth Godin can read your mind as well, because when I read his blog, I'm just staggered at how many times I've been facing a specific problem, and then Seth will write about it that very next day, and I'll flick it onto my business partner Toby. He reads Seth's blog all the time anyway, but I'll write to him and go, "Wow, we were just facing this, and he's solved it for us, or he's told us what we should be doing." So it's incredible how attuned he is to people like us and our marketing and business needs.
Yeah. It's you know what, it's just the thing that I love about what Seth does, and this is something that I try to do every time I'm in front of an audience, is he can draw a story that encapsulates an idea so well. And we know how powerful storytelling is, but he'll bring a story in that just gets you fixated, and then once he tells you the conclusion, you think, wow, that was amazing. And then I'll often unravel it and say, if he had said that without that story, no one would have cared. But knowing which story to pull in that illustrates that was just genius. He had a post like that in the last few days that it was talking about how you treat your customers. And in essence, the gist of it was, if this was your last customer, how would you treat them differently than you're treating them today? And he started with, what if this is the last generation of children? Would we just disregard schools and education and child safety? No, would make sure they had the best experience ever. So now let's bring that focus to your clients. And drawing that parallel really just sucked you into the story.
He's a master storyteller. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, finally, Ian, are there any closing thoughts or final pieces of advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
You know what? It's really just, I believe that effective sales is about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. It's not about persuasion. It's not about coercion. There are no Jedi mind tricks here, even though I just had an article I posted that referenced Yoda. But it's about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. When our clients realize that we're looking out for their best interest and ahead of our own, then it creates that comfortable area where you can truly work on the same side of the table to try and focus on what's impacting their business and what kind of results they're looking for. And for my clients who do that, there's less stress in their life, and they're achieving great results, and their customers see them as a valued resource. So it's that whole level of getting to the truth more so than trying to sell your stuff.
Awesome. And how can listeners get in touch with you, Ian?
The easiest place is either via Twitter at Grow My Revenue is my Twitter handle is Grow My Revenue. And my website is Grow My Revenue. So it's all Grow My Revenue, makes it easy. You can even listeners can get 2 preview chapters, the same side selling via our site. And that way they can preview it and see if they love it before they move forward. Because as I always say, it's not a fit for everybody, but they'll have to determine whether or not it's a fit for them.
That's very generous of you. Thank you for sharing that. I will link to all of those websites and your sample chapters in the show notes. Ian, on behalf of all of our listeners, thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. It was a good time.
There we have a very entertaining talk with Ian Altman, the author of Same Side Selling. Something that I particularly found interesting about that chat was the idea of being, literally on the same side of the table as your prospective customer. And I think that, with content marketing done well, that collaborative approach to sales is definitely where you get to. So as opposed to that sort of confrontational sales where it feels like you're trying to sell somebody a product, you are literally and figuratively on the same side of the table working to find the best outcome for your prospective customer. It actually leads me to a question that I'm commonly asked when it comes to marketing, and that is, how do I go about marketing if I hate marketing and if I feel really, yucky doing it because I've got to talk about myself? How would you answer that, Tobes?
Yeah, it's a really great question, isn't it? Because it does, there's so much, I guess, negative sentiment attached to sort of that whole self-promotion concept. But really, I think the key to marketing now is that the customer is ultimately so well informed by the time that they get to you. So really, marketing is more about getting the right information to the right people at the right time, and therefore taking an educational approach to your marketing means that people will grow to know, like, and trust you, which is really relevant on our content marketing sales funnel ads that we'll put into the notes, everyone. But, that idea of selling has really changed, in my opinion, to be, how do you educate your customer so then they can make an informed purchase decision and they then choose to buy from you, as opposed to you having to sell to them. So I guess that sounds as though it would align really neatly with Ian's philosophy as well.
Yeah.
What's your take, Ads?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what I got from my chat with Ian is that, you really do, if you're the person who's most helpful and you go in with an approach of, I'm here to help you, whether it's in the marketing phase and you do that by the content that you deliver for free, or whether you're doing that in the sales consultation by working with them to help them get what is genuinely in their best interest. If you're helpful and that's the approach you go into with it, you don't ever need to worry about, being uncomfortable when it comes to sales or uncomfortable when it comes to marketing.
It's really true. I guess the other part of marketing that people sometimes forget is that idea of, that every single piece of what you do is your marketing too. Ads, people talk about brand, and I know that certainly hasn't been a favourable term in our eyes, but, your brand is made up of every single piece of what you do, and your marketing is, everything from, your invoice is a part of your marketing as well. And I know you've sort of been quite vocal around that, Ads, in terms of making sure that all of those details line up. How do you see that working as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Marketing is so much more than just what you put on your email newsletter or just what you post to Twitter or your blog. To me, it's what people say about you and what Google says about you, and every single piece of your business, how you look at meetings, how you come across in interviews, that personality and your beliefs and everything else that you stand for all counts towards your marketing efforts. And a lot of the time, when you're buying from somebody who you like, and you typically buy from people who you like, it's often very difficult to actually put a finger on why you're actually buying from them. It's not, because of this piece of marketing. It never feels like you've been marketed to. It never feels like you've been sold to. But you just know, well, I like this person or I like this company and I get lots of value from them and they've made my life easier and I want to be a customer of theirs. And I think when you have that all-round approach of helping and you think that everything that you do contributes to your marketing, then that's what we need to be striving for, as opposed to, just thinking of marketing as what we say on our blog or what we push out on our email newsletter.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. As always, this show is brought to you by Web Marketing That Works, our new book. and specifically the bonus 33 free templates that go along with it. If you're keen to download those, jump over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. And as always as well, our intent is to deliver actionable advice. So we really welcome your feedback and questions, and let us know either via email or Twitter. My email address is toby.jenkins@bluewiremedia.com.au, or you can get me on Twitter at Toby_Jenkins. What about you, Ads?
Okay, so if you've got a pen out, I am adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au, and on Twitter at Franklin_Adam. We look forward to your feedback. We look forward to your questions. If you do want to leave a voice question, head over to our website, and on the right-hand side, you will see a bar that says Ask a Question. Hit that and speak into your computer. That will automatically send across to us, and we can answer those questions on the show. If you have enjoyed the show, we would be very appreciative of an honest review on iTunes, and we will try to give a shout out to all the lovely listeners that leave us a 5-star review. So I think that's a wrap for this session, Tobes. Thank you, listeners, and we will see you next time.
Thanks so much, everyone.